So, Earth science is really a study of all of the things which make up planet Earth. So it's a study of the rocks that make up Earth, and that's really geology. It's a study of the Earth's oceans, so oceanography. It's a study of the atmosphere. It's a study of what the Earth's composed of too. So it's really a study of everything to do with Earth. But in grade 6 science, we're going to be really focused on how the structure of the Earth results in things like earthquakes, volcanoes, and tsunamis. So pretty exciting stuff, really. So this is a diagram of the structure of the Earth. And we can see quite clearly that the Earth is made up of different layers. So there's the most outer layer is called the crust, and this is here shaded as grey. Importantly here, you'll notice that this diagram, this triangular diagram here, is not actually to scale. So the crust isn't that thick, isn't this thick. This diagram, the circle, is to scale. So you can see this bit of grey here, that really thin layer of grey on the outside of the Earth. That's how big the crust is compared to the rest of the layers of the Earth. It's really thin. In some places it's only 5 kilometres thick. But yeah, the crust is the first layer of the Earth. So the crust is the first layer. It's quite thin. Underneath the crust, so if you could dig straight down from wherever you're sitting right now, you'd have to dig through the crust. And then once you got through the crust, you'd get to the mantle. So there's an upper mantle and a lower mantle actually, but these areas here are the mantle. The mantle starts off at about 500 to 900 degrees Celsius, right at the top near the crust, and it actually moves down to being around about 4,000 degrees, the mantle. So the mantle is quite hot. They say the mantle is highly viscous. So if something is viscous, it means it's really thick. So water is not very viscous, you can pour it, but honey is very viscous. You can pour it, but it pours really, really slowly. Well, the mantle is ridiculously viscous. So I suppose you could pour it, but it would take forever to pour. So it's really, really, really thick, but it does slowly, slowly move. So that's the mantle. And then underneath the mantle, or towards the center of the Earth, there's an outer core and an inner core. And the middle of the inner core actually gets to, well, over 5,000 degrees Celsius in temperature. So it gets really, really hot. So the upper mantle starts at about 500 degrees Celsius. So right about here, it'll be about 5,000 degrees Celsius, 500, sorry. And then in the inner core, right in the middle of the Earth, would be about 5,000 degrees Celsius. So the Earth actually gets hotter the deeper and deeper down you go. So if you were to dig, you'd have to have some sort of super duper suit on to stop yourself getting burnt. But that's basically the structure of the Earth. It starts off with a crust. That's the bit you can see, really. And then there's an upper mantle. There is actually, it's called a lower mantle, some people call it. There's an outer core and there's an inner core. It gets hotter the closer you go to the center of the Earth. And if we were to measure from the center of the Earth all the way to the surface of the Earth, we'd find that it was around about 6,300 kilometers. So the Earth's pretty big and it's made up of a bunch of different layers. Now, the surface of the Earth is actually composed of a series of movable plates, and they're called tectonic plates. You can see in this diagram here, there's a number of tectonic plates. For example, here is the Pacific plate, and here is the South American plate, and here's the Indian plate. That's an exciting plate. Here's the African plate. So all of these plates, if you were to just look at the Earth, you would think that they were stationary, but they're actually all slowly, slowly moving. And this diagram shows you some of the ways that they're moving. For example, the Indian plate and the Eurasian plate, these two arrows here, I'll draw them a little bit bigger. These two arrows are pointing towards each other, which means the Eurasian plate and the Indian plate are actually moving towards each other. And that's actually how the Himalayas formed. As another example, over here we've got the Pacific plate and the North American plate here. they've got two arrows which look like this, which means they're actually sliding past each other. And round about here is a very famous fault line called the San Andreas Fault. So their two plates are moving past each other. And there are also some plates, so here's an example right here, where the arrows look like this. And that is because the Eurasian plate and the North American plate are actually moving away from each other. So these tectonic plates, they cover the Earth, and they're actually always very slowly moving. And therefore, the continents on top of them are also very slowly moving. And that's a theory called continental drift. So the tectonic plates, they're always moving, and so are the continents on top of them. And that's a large part of the structure of the Earth. So, how does an earthquake happen? Well, first of all, you need to have two tectonic plates rubbing or pushing against each other. So here I've got one tectonic plate here, and this is, over this side, is another tectonic plate. So I've got these two tectonic plates rubbing against each other. And here's another picture of two tectonic plates rubbing against each other. This is a picture of the San Andreas Fault. But there's two tectonic plates. So two of those big plates on Earth are pushing up against each other. So what happens is, when two tectonic plates are pushing or rubbing against each other, sometimes they get a bit stuck because the edges are really jagged. So they get a bit stuck and they kind of push past each other. And when that happens, when they kind of get a bit stuck and pull a bit, the Earth around them can shake. And these waves, or these seismic waves, can move out from the point where they got stuck and then they jolted or crashed into each other. So what happens in terms of the anatomy of an earthquake really is the point where the tectonic plates start to shoot off these seismic waves is called the focus. It's also called the hypocenter. So we could write here hypocenter. So that's the point where the earthquake actually originates or starts. And if we go directly up from the hypocenter, we actually get to the epicenter. And that's basically the point on the surface of the Earth which is directly above the focus or the hypocenter. So you've got these two tectonic plates which are rubbing against each other. That causes the Earth to shake when they move past each other or crash into each other a bit. These wave fronts or seismic waves move out from the focus or the hypocenter of the earthquake. And the epicenter is the point directly above the Earth where the earthquake is the strongest. And the further away you move from the epicenter of an earthquake, the less you'll feel the earthquake, so the less you'll feel the ground shake. So that's basically how an earthquake works. So the Earth's got mountains all over it, but how did mountains get formed? Well, it's really interesting to look at the Indian tectonic plate and the Eurasian tectonic plate, because around about 71 million years ago, the Indian tectonic plate was nowhere near the Eurasian tectonic plate, so there was this ocean in between the two plates. A long, long time ago, all of this space here was ocean, so 71 million years ago. But what's happened over those last 71 million years is that slowly, well, some people would say fast, the Indian landmass has moved. It moved at a rate of around about 20 centimetres per year, and it moved into the Eurasian plate. And what happened was, when it crashed into the Eurasian plate, the two bits of Earth, the two tectonic plates, they crashed into each other at 20 centimetres per year, so a huge speed, crashed into each other, and they pushed up their land masses. So when they ran into each other, they pushed land up, and by pushing that land up, they actually made the largest mountain range on Earth, the Himalayas, which is in the northern part of India. So that's how mountains are made. Basically, tectonic plates run into each other and push land up to make a mountain. So how do scientists measure earthquakes? Well, they use something called a seismometer or a seismograph. And I've got a picture of one right here. So basically, they have one part of it which is connected to the ground, so it doesn't move. Well, it moves whenever the ground moves. And they've got another part of it which is, a heavy mass connected, by a string, but this mass, through a process called inertia, this mass won't move, even when the ground moves. So what happens is, when an earthquake occurs, this part of the seismometer or the seismograph, this part will move, and this has some paper on it. So the paper will be moving left and right, left and right, left and right, but the ball, which has a pen on the bottom, it stays steady. So because the earth and the paper is moving, the pen will end up drawing this squiggly line on the paper as the paper moves underneath it. And that paper will tell us how big the earthquake is. We actually measure earthquakes, we used to measure earthquakes using a scale called the Richter scale, but a few years ago now, quite a number of years ago, most scientists have moved to the moment magnitude scale, and it's just a way to measure earthquakes. A 10 on the moment magnitude scale or Richter scale, that is a huge earthquake, and a 1 on the scale is a teeny, teeny, tiny earthquake. But scientists measure earthquakes using seismographs or seismometers. So volcanoes occur when some molten rock or magma from underneath the Earth's surface ends up bursting through the crust of the Earth in the form of lava. So we see this red hot molten rock comes through the Earth's surface. The most common way that volcanoes form is actually when two tectonic plates simply move apart from each other a bit. And then some of the magma comes up to the surface, so they move apart. Some of the magma comes up to the surface, and there's some lava, and it's a little bit of a volcano. But the most exciting way a volcano happens is when subduction occurs. So what happens during subduction is one tectonic plate actually slides underneath another tectonic plate. Now, when the one tectonic plate slides underneath the other, there's all sorts of friction and heat, and what happens then is the tectonic plate that's sliding under, it melts. So the rock melts and forms, a magma chamber. So all this molten rock forms just underneath the Earth. And because it actually creates a lot of pressure, it tries to find a way out of that little chamber it's stuck in, and often it'll find its way up through the crust to the surface of the Earth, and it will end up spilling over the top and making these, volcanic mountain ranges. So basically what happens in the most exciting volcanoes is one tectonic plate slides underneath another tectonic plate, some of the rock melts, and you get a magma chamber, and then pressure builds up, and that magma, that lava, ends up bursting through the crust of the Earth and releasing all sorts of toxic gases and rocks and lava, and that all spews out everywhere. And that's the volcanoes that we're probably most familiar with, the exciting ones that happen because of subduction. So the way a tsunami happens is basically there's an earthquake under the ocean. And what happens when some tectonic plates rub together? One tectonic plate can occasionally jolt up a little bit. And when one tectonic plate jolts up a little bit, it pushes all of the water above it up a little bit too. And when this happens right in the middle of the ocean, this big bulge of water which has been pushed up ends up seeping away to the sides. So we can see here, there's two bulges of water. And those bulges of water, or waves, end up traveling across the ocean at hundreds of kilometers an hour until they approach the shore. And when they approach the shore, they can mount up into an enormous wave that we call a tsunami and cause heaps and heaps of damage. So that's how a tsunami forms. Basically, a bit of the earth on the bottom of the ocean jumps up a bit. It pushes all the water above it up, and that water travels across the ocean as an enormous wave until it hits shore and sometimes, unfortunately, causes a fair bit of damage.